What's a let that sink in fun fact? Story 1. History. There was a time in history when trees existed, but the fungi which caused wood to rot had not yet evolved to digest wood. Dead trees and plants would pile up, and the 35% oxygen atmosphere caused massive fires. This is also the time where petrified wood came from. Trees would sit in mud for thousands of years and not rot, while minerals slowly replaced the wood structures. Every generation you work backward in your ancestry doubles in size. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. By the time you reach the 15th century, you're potentially descended from over 500,000 people. By the time you reach the year 500, your potential direct ancestors exceed the entire population of humans that have ever existed. That means that many people repeat your ancestry. You're descended from the same people multiple times. This is because relatives married relatives. Cousins married cousins, for example. That's right, folks. You are a product of to some degree or another. The Roman ruins are as old to us as the pyramids were to the Romans when they came across them. Ancient Egypt is ancient. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born in the same year. Queen Elizabeth and Marilyn Monroe were born a month apart. We are closer to the year 2040 than the year of 1994. If we held a minute of silence for every person that died in the Holocaust, we would be silent for 11 years. We put a man on the moon, 1969, before we put wheels on our luggage, 1970. The Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. T-Rex lived 65 million years ago. The Stegosaurus was more ancient to the T-Rex than the T-Rex is to us. The Teotihuacan pyramids, known to be the most architecturally significant Mesoamerican pyramids, were not built by the Aztecs. The Aztecs found it abandoned, settled there, and gave it its name. The origins of its founders is still a mystery. The Egyptians were a force in 2000 BCE. The Romans were in power at around 0 CE. The Egyptians are as old to the Romans as the Romans are to us. Egyptians are very fun to consider. When the Romans were in power, the pyramids of the Egyptians were already 2,500 years old, more ancient to them than the ancient Egyptians are to us today. And they didn't have pictures nor the internet. Even more than staggering, the Sphinx actually shows us signs of possible water erosion. This would put its creation in the 6th millennium BCE. The time between the first known pharaoh, 3200 BC, and the last one, 30 BC, is greater than the period from the last pharaoh and the moon landing with over 1,000 years to spare. The Great Pyramid was built before the last woolly mammoth died. When humans started farming, blue eyes in humans hadn't mutated yet. The cigarette lighter was actually invented before the match and the cigarette. Sharks predate trees. The oldest shark fossils we know of are 420 to 450 million years old. The oldest known tree is Watiza, about 385 million years old. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump were all born within a 66-day stretch. The Holy Roman Empire existed until 30 years after the United States was founded, 1776 to 1806. Oxford University is actually older than the Aztecs. The University of Oxford is a collegiate research university located in Oxford, England. It has no known date of foundation, but there is evidence of teaching as far back as 1096, making it the oldest university in the English-speaking world and the world's second oldest university in continuous operation. The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, began as an alliance of 3 Nahua. These 3 city-states ruled the area in and around the Valley of Mexico from 1428 until the combined forces of the Spanish conquistadors and their native allies under Hernan Cortés defeated them in 1521. France was still using the guillotine when the first Star Wars film came out. In the lifetime of a Japanese person, they went from samurai swords to nuclear weapons. The majority of the first American settlers only survived the first winter by eating their children. Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landing than when the pyramids were built. The Giza Sphinx is so old that it was the ancient Egyptians themselves who performed the first restoration after digging it from under the dunes, over 1,000 years after it had been built. Charlemagne's name translates to Charles the Great. This wasn't due to his leadership, this was due to the fact that he was 6'4", when the average male was 5'6". His name was just Big Charlie. The vast majority of human beings have kicked the bucket already. As much as 50 billion plus have come and gone before everyone is alive today. The longest surviving Civil War veteran lived to see nuclear combat and supersonic flight. It took humanity approximately 4 times longer to switch from copper swords to steel swords than it took to switch from steel swords to nuclear bombs. And it took humans approximately 50 times as long to switch from stone tools to bronze than it did to switch from bronze to firearms. Makes you wonder what's coming next because if the trend continues, it'll be soon. When will we get nuclear swords?
Psst. Let's be honest. Does your room look dull as shit? Yeah, well, most do. Luckily, I just launched Rufus Rugs. Custom, hand-tufted rugs. And no, this isn't some BS dropshipping company. We have a warehouse in Canada where me and my friends hand-tuft every single rug. So if you're looking to bring your room to life with some awesome anime rugs, or literally anything you can think of, we can get it done for you. From Rick and Morty to The Last Airbender, we've got you covered. Hit the link in the description to get a free quote.
Story 2. Space. If the sun were scaled down to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. The vastness of space is mind-boggling. When NASA pitched the idea of the Voyager mission to Richard Nixon with the idea of touring the outer planets, he was told that the last time it was possible, Thomas Jefferson was in the White House. The particular planetary alignment that Voyager 2 used on its journey occurs only once every 176 years. You can place all the planets of our solar system between Earth and the Moon and even have a bit of spare space after. Neutron stars have such strong gravity that if you dropped a marshmallow into one, it would be like dropping a 3-megaton nuclear warhead on Earth. And if you add mass to a neutron star, the volume of the star shrinks. The Moon orbits us from the west to the east, but we see it move across the sky east to west because of the rate of the Earth's rotation. Our observation is like being in a faster car watching a slower car, heading in the same absolute direction, fall further and further behind us. This is no coincidence. The Moon's orbit is a vestige of it being material from Earth. It would be like a truck pulling a trailer on a circular track, unhitching it and then circling the track and catching up again. The universe is so empty that if we took 3 grains of sand and placed them inside a vast cathedral, that cathedral will be more filled with sand than the universe is with stars. As you get closer to a black hole, time goes slower. This means that everything farther away would experience time faster and faster as you get closer and closer to the black hole. A second for you could be 1 billion years for those outside of it. Thus, if you fell into a black hole and looked outside, you would see the universe die with you. If the Earth was the size of a marble, you would need 7 miles of space to build a scale model of the solar system. The largest star ever discovered, VY Canis Majoris, is so large that if it were placed where the sun is now, its surface would extend to beyond Jupiter. It means that we humans on Earth would be only 1/8 of the distance to the surface. There are about 12 times more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way. An iPhone is more powerful than every computer NASA had, combined, in 1969 during the first lunar landing. There is, on average, a supernova explosion every 50 years in the Milky Way. On average, there are 30 every second in the observable universe. This is one of the most insane things I've heard. Let me just repeat that. A supernova explosion every 50 years in the Milky Way, on average there are 30 every second in the observable universe. Mind-blowing stuff. Story 3. Science. Due to the way the speed of light works, combined with our current understanding of the expansion of the universe, there are areas of the universe that are both impossible for us to visit or even observe. The fabric of the universe expands faster over that distance than light can travel, so it never reaches us. Your bones are wet. 2/3 of carbon and other greenhouse gases are created in the atmosphere by 80 companies. That's why it won't change. There is a tube running through the middle of your body. One ends in your mouth and the other ends in your butt. We're all basically walking meat donuts. The first electric car was invented at the end of the 19th century, and it went 65 miles per hour because early gas engines had very low torque. Some of the earliest cars were gas-electric. Your body consists of roughly a 1-to-1 ratio of bacterial to human cells. It is unlikely that a person could actually die in quicksand since most quicksand is only a few inches deep. Most people who die in quicksand get stuck in tidal basins and drown when the tide comes in. If there have existed 1 billion alien races out there, since the universe began all with the capability of light-speed intergalactic travel, the chance of just one of those races existing at the same time period of humanity, roughly 200,000 years, is less than 10%. The chance of that 10% likely alien race being within 200,000 light-years of Earth is 0.000015%. So basically, if there were 1 billion hyper-advanced alien races in the universe, there's only a less than 0.0000015% chance that one would ever reach us, if you try to consider all the possible races that exist but don't have intergalactic travel capability. Scientists haven't found a particular brain component responsible for consciousness. There is no physical proof of consciousness, it just is. There is more than one type of infinity, and they aren't all the same size. From 0 down in negative numbers, infinite, from 0 up in positive numbers, also infinite. Combine them, still infinite, but bigger than either on their own. Scientists who work with cockroaches often develop allergies to cockroaches. At the same time, they also develop allergies to pre-ground coffee. People that get bit by cockroaches often develop allergies to both cockroaches and shellfish. Heard of a guy in my city who bred roaches for reptile food. He was going to clean out one of the empty terrariums. He opened the hinged plastic lid too hastily and a cloud of roach poop dust hit him in the face. Without any previous allergy, he still instantly fainted from anaphylactic shock. Goddamn most disgusting animal on Earth. Oh, and there are apparently 4,500 species of cockroach, of which only 30 are considered pests. Ugh, my skin's itching from reading this. You guys need to stop thinking about things like that gap under your fridge you've been ignoring for years, or what's in all that dust under your bed. Story 4. Next to the US Army, Disney World is the largest buyer and importer of explosives in the USA. I was wondering what Mickey needed nukes for before I remembered fireworks exist. Story 5. If you live in the USA, you have better odds of dating Taylor Swift than dying of bird flu and Ebola combined. Story 6. The man who invented the FRISBEE was cremated and turned into a FRISBEE. Story 7. The Titanic had two sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. There was a woman called Violet Jessup, a nurse and a cruise liner stewardess that worked on all three. The Olympic crashed into a warship whilst leaving harbor but was able to make it back. She was on the Titanic as it sank and is referenced in the Titanic film. As a stewardess who was told to set an example to the non-English speaking passengers as the ship sank. She looked after a baby on lifeboat 16 until being rescued by the Carpathia the next day. It's not known what exactly caused the sinking of the Britannic, but the lifeboats hit the water too early. As the ship sank, the rear lifted up and a number of the lifeboats were sucked into the propellers. Violet had to jump out of the lifeboat she was in and sustained a serious head injury, but survived. She was on board for all three incidents in the space of 5 years. She went back to continue to work at sea for another 30 years before retiring in 1950. She died of heart failure in 71. After hitting the iceberg, it took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to fully submerge underwater. Finally, some actual sink-in facts. Story 8. Dozens of Americans lose their lives every day from slipping in the shower and hitting their heads. Dozens, I tell you. It's one of the primary leading causes of non-medical deaths in the USA. Story 9. Here are a few food facts. They make chocolate milk from milk that isn't white enough to be sold as plain milk. Also, many foods, from ground beef to orange juice, would be gray by the time they hit the market. They were intended to make them more appealing to consumers. Pineapple takes 2 years to grow. About 40% of the world's food is wasted, and a lot of that is before it even hits the shelves. Fruit Loops are all the same flavor. Vending machines have more people than sharks. Why would vending machines go around killing sharks anyway? And why haven't you liked the video and subscribed to the channel yet? Unless you have, then thanks. Story 10. Here are some random life facts. You don't remember being born or most of the first years of your existence. All you know is one day you just started existing and talking in experience or memories. If you choose not to have children, you're the first person in your direct ancestry all the way back to the first humans related to you to not have children. You would also be the first organism in your line not to reproduce, all the way back to the very first organism 4 billion or so years ago. Your computer is much more likely to contract a virus by surfing legitimate church sites than by surfing adult sites. Adult sites generally have experts combating viral stuff, while church sites are maintained by lower-tech volunteers, as a rule. If you have clean water and temperature control, you're better off than half the population. The overwhelming majority of hands you've touched have had a pecker in them at one point. At one point in your life, you were the youngest person on the planet. Congratulations. We are arguably in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on Earth, the last ending of the dinosaurs. Current estimates run that 50% of species on Earth will be extinct by 2050. Sorry for the downer, but it doesn't threaten life on Earth as we understand it. Let that sink in. If you have 2 legs, you have more than the average amount of legs. Literally only one person would need to lose a leg to have this happen. Here are the average hours of minimum wage work needed to pay for 4 years of public college. For baby boomers, 306. Millennials, 4,459. In 2010, around 300 people had as much wealth as the bottom 50% of humanity. It's estimated that as of January 2017, that number is now the same amount of people that can fit into an extra-large golf cart. 8. We can't prove we aren't in a simulation. To explain this a little further for those curious, if we reach a stage where we are capable of creating simulations with this degree of sophistication, then we could run a vast number of them. If each computer could run multiple versions and even a small number of computers were set up to do so, eventually at least some of the simulations would develop until the simulated people could run simulations of their own. Then the simulated squared people could run simulations, and so forth, and so on to infinity. So if there is one reality in potentially infinite simulations, then it is statistically improbable that we live in reality, which explains a lot about the last year or so. About 1 million people die every year from mosquito bites. That's 2,700 per day, or 100 every hour. Think about how many must have died since you started watching this video. If you take into account the fact that on average people sleep, or should sleep, 8 hours a day, if and when you get 99 years of age, you will have only been awake for 66 years, having spent 33 years of your life sleeping. Every subsequent year of your life makes up a smaller portion of it relative to your previous years of living. So at 1 year old, a year is 100% of your life, at 2, 50%, and so on. That's why time feels like it passes more quickly the older we get. 700 million people, about 10% of the world's population, live on less than what $2 a day would buy you in the United States. If you earn more than $32,400 a year, you are in the top 1% of the world's income. That's after adjusting for local prices. A donation to the most effective charity on GiveWell means you will save one life for every around $2,500 donated. There are over 100 million sperm cells in each release. Human ovaries contain about 2 million egg cells. Each of these cells has unique chromosomes. That means, at the moment of conception, the chances that you ended up being you is roughly 1 in 200 trillion. But that's not even close to the end of the staggering probabilities. Your parents had to go through just the right set of chance encounters, say all the right things to the right people, do all the right things at the right time, get together, and do the deed at precisely the right time just to have that 1 in 200 trillion chance to make you. And if that doesn't make the odds even worse in your favor, just think, Your 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, and so on, all the way back to before humans, all the way back through the various ages of the Earth, species to species, all the way back to the origin of sexual reproduction. Every organism in this multi-billion-year chain had to live their entire lives in precisely one particular way, doing certain things at certain times at the right time, and then get millions of those 1 in 200 trillion rolls right in a row just to make you, you. The fact that the person you are today exists at all is staggering, mind-blowingly improbable, and yet that same minuscule probability is the case for every single one of the 7 billion people living on Earth right now. That is why when creationists argue about odds and evolution, they're committing a category error. You and I know that in my above statement, the only 2 possible outcomes aren't either you, or no life exists on Earth at all. If your particular DNA combination never happens, somebody else's will. The odds of winning a lottery might be so small that all the experts say you shouldn't even bother, but somebody, eventually, will still win the lottery. To be in the top 1% of Americans in terms of income, you need to rake in about $400,000 a year, rounded off to $1,000 a day. Really? Just $1,000? Oh, hell yeah! I only have $999 to go today. Story 11. The US Navy has the 2nd largest air force in the world. Story 12. China used more concrete in 3 years than the US used in the entire 20th century. Well, there are like 4 times more people in China than in the US, so… Story 13. You can put almost anything in a container and ship it almost anywhere. The whole world uses the same container standard in any port and any boat. Story 14. Here are some animal facts. Lobsters don't die of old age. Taking into consideration that humanity has only explored a small percentage of the ocean, there could very well be big freaking lobsters just chilling out there. Adwaita, the longest living animal ever, was a giant tortoise given to Clive of India. He was born around 1750 and died in 2006. He existed longer than the United States has. There are more tigers privately owned in Texas than tigers in the wild. There are more chickens in America than people on the planet. Cows kill more Americans than terrorists in most years. Story 15. Over the space of 3 days, an estimated 165 people survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bomb attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the more famous ones, who was only 2 miles from ground zero when the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. It hit when he was walking to work on the last day of a work trip. After he heard the drone of a plane, he looked up at it and the sky lit up. He was then plucked from the ground, spun around, and tossed into a nearby potato field. Miraculously, he survived, despite being covered in burns, soaked in radiation, and with 2 blown eardrums. He spent a night in an air shelter, then took an overnight sleeper train home to Nagasaki to see his family. When he made it to a hospital in Nagasaki, he was so burnt a childhood friend didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. Despite his wounds, he made it to work the next day. He started giving his boss a rundown on what happened, and his boss thought he was crazy. There was no way one bomb could destroy a city. Suddenly, a bright light lit up the room. He panicked and dropped to the floor of the office seconds before the shockwave smashed out the office windows. He had just been hit twice by a nuclear blast in the space of 3 days. At the age of 93, he was given the title Nijiu Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. He died the following year. So next time you think you're having a bad week at work, yeah. Story 16. The overall goal in golf is to play less golf. Story 17. All that stuff you learn about in history class about civilizations rising up and dying out, about certain groups kicking off other groups and taking over their lands, that is still happening right now. But I thought all of that stopped when we stopped learning about it in history class. Story 18. Schizophrenia's hallucinations are shaped by culture. Americans with schizophrenia tend to have more paranoid and harsher voices and hallucinations. In India and Africa, people with schizophrenia tend to have more playful and positive voices. Story 19. All 6 of the stars of Friends negotiated 2% syndication rights for the show. Friends still make about $1 billion yearly through reruns, Hulu, etc. All 6 Friends collect a $20 million check annually. Yes, that means David Schwimmer still gets $20 million a year for doing nothing. So when you're alone in your 1-bedroom apartment watching Friends and snickering at how many of them are losers who haven't been famous since, there's a reason why. They don't have to work, ever again. Story 20. Norway and North Korea, despite being on opposite sides of the globe, are only separated by one other country. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy what are some very creepy facts. Story 2 gave me goosebumps. See you in that video.